to show you how I converted my torso pattern, which is this simple pattern, with the sleeves, into this shirt with these style lines instead of the darts, and I added a pocket. The sleeve is basically the same. I just made it a little bit bigger, and I added this collar. For the back, I just did a back seam with an opening, and I did this dart. I integrated into the back seam. So we're gonna need the simple torso pattern and the sleeve pattern, making sure that they're the ones without the seam allowance. So the first step is I decided how short I want my shirt to be, and I just matched the patterns. And I'm going to shorten it. I matched them at the bottom, and normally you'd be using a pencil, but I'm using a pen so that we can see the lines better on camera. So I'm making it about this short. I already measured it on my doll and figured out how long I want the shirt to be. So I am getting rid of that amount on the pattern, the back and the front. And then for the next step, to start the style lines, what I'm going to do is I'm going to trace both these pieces onto a fresh piece of paper. And I'm going to trace it on a paper to make sure that I have enough around it so that I can add seam allowances later. But we're going to trace the whole torso front and trace the darts and the grain line. I'm going to do the same thing for the back. I shortened my torso block, and I did it on my graphics program, but you can definitely do it, just trace it by hand. So the next step is I want to start doing the style lines. I'm going to work on the front bodice first, and to start working on the style lines, we have to connect these two darts together, and the intersection of the darts is going to be the apex point, which is the highest point of the bust. So you do this by drawing a horizontal line, a vertical line down the center dart, and a vertical line. I'm going to decide where I want this style line to start and where I want it to end at the hip. It's gonna go like this. Kind of looks like an upside down a princess seam. So I'm gonna decide, you can decide wherever you want it to be, that this point is gonna be where I want that dart to start, or that style line to start. Then I'm going to connect it to the apex, to that little point that I made. So that's where it starts. And then I'm going to bring it down to the hip part where I want it to end. Sort of So I'm going to follow that center line again. And then I'm going to connect that line where I want the style line to start at the hip. Here, now I want to curve this part here. So you can do it by hand. And actually I'm going to do it by hand with the pencil first. And then I'll use the French curve to round it out nicely. So this is where I want my line to be. And then I'm just gonna, just so we can see it on camera. Actually, we want to get rid of this here, this dart. So I'm gonna make my line along the dart. And then make my curve here. So this is the next line. We're getting rid of all of this. And now to cut out this, we're going to connect the first dart, the end of the dart, to the apex point. Again, we're ignoring the dart. We're just connecting the first leg of the dart to that apex point. Now what's going to happen is I'll cut from here to the bust dart point, but not all the way, just kind of to keep it connected, and cut here. So this is going to be the part where we pivot. And it also helps to have your pattern all cut out. But I'm leaving it on the paper just so that I can add the seam lines. And what's going to happen is I'm going to close this seam, this dart, by pivoting all the way to the other end of the dart. And then we're going to tape that. And this is going to be the dart now, the new dart. So now we're going to cut the pattern all the way around. And actually I should have left it connected so I can add the seam lines, but what I want to show is how to connect the dart to make a new seam line. Cutting, I want to make sure I add the grain line to this piece so that we know exactly. It's important, especially when you're matching fabrics. And I'm going to cut this. So now we're going to have it in two parts. And if it's a little peak here, just round it off. And now for the next part is the bottom part. So we're going to cut this whole entire thing, ignoring the dart. because we want this shirt to be loosely fitted. This is where the hem is. So now we have the two parts for the front. For the back, basically what I want to do is I want to move this dart to the back here, but fit it kind of loosely. So I'm going to make a line in the middle of my dart. And I'm going to measure how much of this dart is taken up so that I can transfer this to this part. And you can do it on a graphics program by just moving your whole dart to this part here. But we're learning how to do it by pencil. So I'm gonna kind of roughly mark where I want to end. And in the middle, this is how much I'm going to take out. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to curve that to match that line. Kind of like creating half of the dart over here, and we're going to ignore this whole thing. And this is how it's going to be cut. Making your shape nice and round. It doesn't have to be exact at this point because I still make a muslin and then make the final fitting with the muslin, and from the muslin is what the pattern is going to be created. So that's the back. It's real simple. Just cut it out. And I have enough space on this piece of paper to add my seam allowances, so I'm not going to cut this. But I will trace these two pieces onto another paper and add seam allowances. And I'm adding extra seam allowances. I'm adding 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way around. And I'm adding an extra 1/4 inch to the sides just because I want the shirt to be loose and the bodice is actually pretty fitted. For the sleeve, since I'm going to add a 1/2 inch, 1/2 inch to the sides, 1/4 inch to here, 1/4 inch here, everywhere else 1/4 inch. And because I added a 1/2 inch to the sides, I'm also going to add 1/2 inch seam allowance to the sleeves. And I noticed on my final pattern that my sleeve was a little bit shorter than what I wanted it, so I'm going to add also a length to the sleeve, extra length to the sleeve. For the collar is pretty simple. What you want to do is decide how wide you want the collar to be here and make a rectangle that size. So I had already measured it, so mine was 8 centimeters. So I'm going to do an 8 centimeter rectangle. And the way I measure the collar is I take my tape measure and measure with the tape measure standing up. And I did that before I cut this pattern. Did it on the torso pattern. And I measure it like that. And the collar is pretty simple. It's just a rectangle with the tapered ends. And I'm gonna double this rectangle because the collar is folded at the top and tapered, and then it's gonna cross over the front a little bit. And I did take that into account on my measurement. So this would be the back of the collar. And this would be the front. And the front tapers. A little bit. And then you can make that curve a little bit better with the French curve. And what I did was I folded that. Because like I said, this is going to be the top of the collar. Add your grain line. We want the collar to stretch across, so the grain line would be going that way. And you can trace it on the other side so you can have the shape of it. Or you can cut it out and then you would have to trace it again to another piece. So I'm just going to trace it that way. I know exactly. Because we still need to add the seam lines. And that's basically the shape that it's going to be. You can ignore this part here. And we just label it and add 1/4 inch seam allowances all the way around, because this is going to be, there's a seam in the back. And then this is the front part that's going to be crisscrossed in the front. So that's the shape of a collar that's going to create this type of collar. And that's it. From your torso pattern, you've created a whole different pattern, which is this one again. And after I created the pattern on paper, you're going to cut it out of your fabric, whatever fabric you need to use to try it on the doll. I also dropped the shoulders a little bit, like I added extra width, a little bit of extra width to the shoulders. So that's something that you're going to do on your tryout pattern as well. Do it on the front and the back so that your seams match. Because with this being a little bit looser, it looks nicer if the shoulder is dropped a little bit. For the front pocket, it's basically a trapezoid. Trapezoid? I think it's a trapezoid. I'm not sure what the... So how I did the front pocket was I made the shape right on the pattern where I want it to be. And I made it with a nicer ruler, so. Let's do it the right way. So you want to decide where you want the pattern to start, where you want it to slant a little bit, and also where you want it to end. If you want it to end right on the hem, or if you want it to end above the hemline. And then I copied this shape, did the grain lines on it, and added the seam allowances. And I just added 1/4 inch seam allowances all the way around after tracing it onto another piece of paper. So this is the shape that I ended up with. And for my I did this a couple of times. this is what I ended up after adding the seam allowances, and this is what I my final pattern. And I forgot to mention that before you cut this out, you should add a notch, so that when you're sewing it, you can match your notches. It's not absolutely essential, but it works out better this way, because that way you know exactly where you're gonna sew it. And also, especially here too, add a notch here on the neck so that you know where the neck connects. And like this one, I made that was too big, the seam allowance that I left at the top there. But you can fix this when you're doing your muslin, and then you can create your final pattern like this. And if you're not into creating patterns on your own, I do have this pattern available in my Etsy shop. It's pretty simple to sew. So thank you for watching, and I hope this was helpful. As always, I'll see you on the next video.